Two policemen led a broken Nancy into an interrogation room. It had no windows and a huge two-way mirror on one side. In the middle was a table and two chairs facing each other. On the table were a microphone and a camera. One officer sat her down facing the mirror. She sat down, tears streaming down her face. The two men left the room, and a young woman with a badge hanging from the end of her necklace walked in. "I'm Detective Sarah Lincoln." She sat down across from Nancy. "I know this is a very difficult time for you, but we need to talk about everything, right down to what happened this morning in the parking lot outside the liquor store." "I've already told two officers, Detective. I've been here for 4 hours, and I need to get home to my daughter." Nancy stopped talking and cried. The detective turned to the mirror and made a gesture. Just then, an officer came into the room with a box of tissues, placed it on the table next to Nancy, and walked out, closing the door behind him. "My 13-year-old daughter needs me, and I have to go," pleaded Nancy with tears in her eyes. "I completely understand, Mrs. Westford, but there was so much crying and sobbing that the two officers couldn't understand a thing. After you called your parents, they went to your house and they are with your daughter," the detective said in a soothing voice. "I have a few questions. We need to understand the whole situation." She took Nancy's hand. "This is not an interrogation. Think of it as a conversation between two women. I understand." Nancy sobbed. "Would you like something to drink, Mrs. Westford? Coffee, water?" No, thank you. I'm fine. Let's just finish this conversation, please. Where should I start?" Nancy took a tissue from the box and wiped away her tears. "Let's start at the beginning. I was born Nancy Stewart. On my first day of first grade, the teacher made me sit next to Steve Westford. He was a very charming boy. He had interesting school supplies like colorful pens, a pencil with Mickey's head on top, a butterfly-shaped sharpener, and a scented eraser. We became friends, and at lunchtime we were already sitting together. In the afternoon, when my mom came to pick me up, he ran up to us and gave me a pen." Nancy smiled. My mom was surprised at his kind gesture. She later told me that on my first day of school, I already had an admirer. From then on, we were always together and all our classes were spent together. Of course, we always sat next to each other. The whole school knew that we were inseparable. We lost our virginity together on the night of our high school graduation. He was always tender and passionate. What about both your parents?" "They knew we'd been in love since we were kids, and they were fine with that. We went to college, I chose business administration, and he chose accounting. He was always very good with numbers. After college, he got a job as a junior accountant for a cosmetics company, and I went to work in the administrative department of a supply company. 3 months later, we were married. Steve was the only child in the family, and we stayed with his parents. Steve said we could save money to buy or rent a house when we had children. A year later, Stephanie was born. Steve was the happiest man in the world, and I knew right away that my daughter was going to be Daddy's little girl. After we brought our baby home, he spent most of his time in her room, standing by her crib and either humming or singing." "Was he neglecting you?" Sarah asked. "Oh, no, he was a real gentleman." Nancy cried again. "Be courageous, Mrs. Westford. We had help from my relatives. They watched over Steph. Steve's mom was a housewife. She took care of her when I went back to work. Steve always called his parents by their first names, John and Mary. As Steph got older, she started calling them by their first names, too. A real daddy's girl." "What about your parents? They were grandparents. It seemed like life was good. No mortgage, your daughter was looked after by her grandmother, sorry Mary, a loving husband and a caring father. So, what went wrong?" "When I lived with my mother-in-law, it was like I was being watched every time. If I was even 10 minutes late getting home from work, Mary would ask if there was heavy traffic on the road. When I went shopping alone, she asked where I was going and when I'd be back. When I wore a tight dress to work, she would comment on it. It was as if I lived in prison. Maybe she was overprotective. What about Steve?" "Steve is the nicest person I've ever met. He would never say anything that would hurt me. He once told me we were in love before we were born. That's my Steve." "Did you ever tell him about his mother watching you?" "No, never. He was so close to his parents that I never wanted to bring it up. I knew he would immediately find a house and move away from his parents. I didn't want that to happen." Nancy sobbed. "He promised to protect me, take care of me, and give me all his love. He always treated me like a queen. Would you like to take a short break, Nancy? Sarah asked in a motherly voice. No, let's get this over with. I need to go home. As you wish. Sarah took a deep breath. What was the turning point? After Steph turned 8, John decided to take early retirement. He bought a 2-bedroom condo in Naples, Florida, near the beach, and left the house to us. We only had to pay utilities and property taxes. John and Mary were still the owners of the house. When they moved out, I felt like I had my freedom again. But it was heartbreaking for Steve and Steph. I started wearing whatever I wanted. When I showed up late at night after work, I didn't have to answer to anyone. My co-workers, who had always invited me to their bachelorette parties and whom I had always turned down before, were shocked when one Friday night I showed up alone at the bar they usually went to. Steve agreed to let you go alone to these parties? Yes, indeed. He loved me so much that he never refused me anything. He trusted me more than anything. There were single and married women in our group. Some were faithful to their boyfriends or husbands, and some were not. Whatever happened during these night outings remained our secret. I always drew a line between myself and the men we met. And then one Friday night I met a married man. We talked, we drank, we danced. On the dance floor he pulled me tight against him and I felt the bulge in his pants. It was exciting. After a couple of dances he took me outside to his car, which was parked in the far corner. He opened the back door and bent me over the seat. I asked him to put on a condom. He opened the front door and pulled one out of the glove compartment. Why did you cheat on your husband? Because I could. It was exciting and it was just sex. That night when I got home, Steve was already asleep. I looked at him and cried. I promised myself I'd never do it again. Then I remembered that I had already done it at the altar, in God's house, in front of friends and family. That night I couldn't sleep. I hated myself. The next day I couldn't look him in the eye. He asked me if anything bad had happened. I lied. I told him I wasn't feeling well. In fact, I was full of remorse. That night, as a sign of remorse to forgive myself, I almost killed him with sex. When was the next time you cheated on your husband? I stopped going to bachelorette parties. Every time my coworkers invited me, I always found an excuse to decline. About 6 months later, when they begged me to attend that night, one of my coworkers, Carmela, our department manager, intervened on my behalf and told them I wasn't interested and to leave me alone. Later, during lunch, she came over and sat next to me. She was in her early 50s and was already a grandmother. She had never met her coworkers. She asked me the reason I refused to be at the bachelorette party. I replied that I didn't want to cheat on my husband by being alone with other men. The temptation was there, and at any moment I could cross the line. She looked me in the eye and asked me if I had done it before. At that particular moment, I couldn't lie to her. I told her the truth and how much it hurt. As a mature woman, I hope she gave you good advice, Sarah interjected. Nancy lowered her eyes and shook her head. She took my hand and began to tell me about her life. She had married young. She had 2 daughters, already married, with children. After menopause, she began to feel old, which she couldn't accept. She started wearing tight dresses with cleavage, putting on a lot of makeup and styling her hair like young girls. Her husband was good with that. Still, she was not satisfied. One Saturday afternoon, after shopping, she was in a cafe, and a young man in his early 20s was sitting next to her. After she finished her coffee, he didn't hesitate to ask her if she wanted to have a little fun. Stunned at first, she smiled and asked if he knew of a secluded spot. The young man went with her in her car and showed her an underground parking garage where there were no cameras. He screwed her twice in the back seat. They started seeing each other regularly, and after 6 months he brought a friend and later another. So far, she'd had lovers who were in their early 20s. Her husband never noticed it? She's very careful. I asked her if she had any regrets. She told me that she only loved her husband, and with her young lovers she only had sex. She also said that if her husband didn't know about it, it wouldn't hurt him. Oh my God! Don't tell me you let her influence you? Unfortunately, yes. The hen parties started again, but this time I wasn't alone. Steve thought I was with my co-workers. I decided to sleep with married men just because apparently they cheat on their wives, they'll keep it a secret. You can't imagine how many of them are out there trying their luck to screw other women. As long as there is supply, there will be demand, Sarah observed. I've always ended relationships after 7 to 8 months. Nancy ignored Sarah's sarcasm. I was afraid that a long-term relationship would jeopardize my married life, and at the same time, I wanted to get to know different types of men. After one lover, I would pause for 2 or 3 months and then look for another. Where did you meet them? As I mentioned earlier, these married men are everywhere. You can find them in every bar. We slept in motels on Saturdays, and when I went shopping alone, leaving Steve at home to take care of Stephanie and household chores, and during my bachelorette parties or during long lunches at work. Sometimes, after work, we'd have quick sex in the backseat of my car. You were very busy. Were you never tired when you got home? How could you lead your double life without regrets? I was used to it. However, I never denied Steve anything. He had me when he wanted me. I also insisted that my lovers wear condoms during sex even though I was on birth control. I didn't want to bring home any diseases. And there were no problems? Yeah, until I met Lou about 6 months ago. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Sarah shook her head. Tell me how it all started with Mr. Cypher. Lou Cypher, didn't it? Yes. I was at the supermarket one Saturday afternoon, and as I bent down to grab a bottle of juice from the bottom shelf, I felt someone smack me in the ass. I turned around in shock. It was Lou. He said he was sorry and that he had tripped over something. There was no one in the aisle at that particular moment. There was no one to confirm if it was a deliberate action or not. He then walked away with a smile. As I walked to my car in the parking lot, I couldn't stop thinking about this guy. As I was about to get into my car, he came up to me out of nowhere and apologized again. I told him it was an accident and everything was fine. He asked me out for coffee, and I told him I was married and showed him my ring finger. He said that didn't stop him. He wrote his name and phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to me. He asked me to call him whenever I wanted to talk to a friend. And you didn't throw away the piece of paper with the phone number on it, did you? No. All day and the rest of the week I thought about him. That Friday I led myself into temptation. I called him. He was expecting my call. We arranged to meet the next day at his house. He gave me the address. I had never met my lovers at their places for obvious reasons. It was exciting to have sex with someone in his own bed. At the same time, I was going against my rules and beliefs about single men. I decided to give it a try. We met on Saturday, and the first thing I told him was that he should wear protection. He grumbled a bit and then complied. So it wasn't a one-time affair? Nancy shook her head. No, we continued to date as I had with my previous lovers. After about 3 months, I noticed that he was getting a little possessive. One night during my bachelorette party, he begged me to spend the night with him as he wanted me to wake up in his arms the next morning. Did you really say yes? How could I? Then he wanted to meet on a more regular basis, which I refused. Then he gave me a powder and told me to put it in Steve's drink during dinner. I did, and he slept like a dead man. Then he came to me at night and had me in my bed with my husband sleeping next to me. It was crazy, and I told him I would never do anything like that again. It was then that I decided to distance myself from him. I stopped seeing him during lunch or after work. I made all kinds of excuses. We met after 3 missed Saturdays. He wasn't happy. He was irritated, had me with rage, and pounded me so hard it hurt. After the second round, he asked me to cut Steve off from sex. What did you do? Steve was my man. I belonged to him. I stopped seeing Lou for almost a month. He kept calling and texting me. Every once in a while, I would text him back to say that I was busy and that he had hurt me so badly last time that I still hadn't recovered. He apologized and even sent me flowers to my office. Then last Saturday, I wanted to meet him one last time and tell him that it was over between us. Besides, I realized that I had gone too far in my cheating, and it was time to end it. This would be my last date, and after that, I would be the best wife a husband could have. Nancy took her eyes off Sarah. At that moment, hundreds of thoughts were running through her head. As usual, we met at his house, Nancy continued. We were in the missionary position when he turned me around and I landed on all 4 limbs. He put his arm around my waist and lifted me up. I thought he was going to do it to me doggy style. I kicked him really hard in the groin. He let go of me and clutched his tool in pain. I immediately grabbed my cell phone that was on the nightstand. I told him I would dial 911 if he continued trying to rape me. He didn't answer. He was moaning in the fetal position. I yelled at him that I didn't want to see him again. I quickly put on my dress and walked out of his house. Did he try to contact you after that? No, all week he didn't contact me until this morning. Nancy took a deep breath and shook her head. After about 10 missed calls from him, I blocked his number. Then he called my home phone. I don't know how he got my home phone number. I never gave it to him. Maybe, without your knowledge, he got it from the contact list in your cell phone. Maybe he did. Probably when I was in the bathroom. Steve went to the liquor store to buy some wine. Tonight he wanted to surprise his daughter and me with a wine dinner and tiramisu for dessert. Steph picked up the phone and Lou gave his full name and said he was a coworker of mine and he needed to discuss an important file with me. She told him that I was busy and would call him back later. After she informed me of Lou, I asked my daughter to go and clean her room. I know she always turned up the music louder when doing this. I then went down to the basement and called him from my cell phone. Nancy fell silent and stared at the floor. "What did he say?" Sarah asked after a pause. "He asked me to come to his house immediately or he would inform Steve of my affair. I immediately replied that I intended to inform my husband of my infidelity. I told him that Steve loved me so much that he would forgive me. We would go to therapy together, and I would never look at another man again. Steve would be the only one who would be with me until death do us part." Nancy sobbed and wiped away her tears. Then he said something that scared me. "What was it?" Sarah frowned. "He said that Steve certainly liked wine and that he had good taste." I froze in place. I was at a loss for words. Then he continued by saying that if he couldn't have me, no one else would have me either. Then I heard 2 gunshots and people screaming. I panicked. I shouted questions to him about what was going on. What were those gunshots I heard? What did he do? There was no answer until I heard the car door close. He said the same thing, that if he couldn't get me, no one else could. Then I heard a single gunshot. I panicked. I got in my car and raced to the liquor store. When I got there, the police had already wrapped yellow tape around the crime scene. I found my Steve dead in the parking lot with 2 holes in his chest. Nancy burst into tears. Lou Cipher was found dead in his car near the crime scene with a hole in the back of his head. Apparently, he had shot himself in the mouth. Sarah took Nancy's hand. "You have a daughter to take care of." She turned to the mirror and nodded. "Your parents are waiting in the waiting room. Come on, I'll walk you to them." Walking down the hallway, Sarah stopped Nancy. "According to what you said, Steve was a very good husband and father. He loved his family. He was a good cook, did the chores, looked after the yard and the house. He gave you complete freedom. He was a reliable and perfect husband that any woman would dream of. And yet you cheated on him. It was a mistake. A fatal, fatal mistake." Sarah gave Nancy a squeamish look, turned and walked away. Nancy ran up to her parents and hugged them. They were all crying. "Did you leave Steph home alone?" Nancy asked. Steve's parents, John and Mary, had arrived an hour earlier. Steph called them and they took the next available flight out. "Let's go home." Both of her parents took Nancy's hands and led her out of the station. When they got to the house, some of Stephanie's friends were there. Nancy saw John and Mary. They didn't smile at her. "I need to see Stephanie. Where is she?" Nancy asked. "She is in her room with her friends," answered Mary. At the same time, Steph came down the stairs accompanied by her friends. Looking at her, Nancy realized that she had been crying for hours. "John!" shouted Steph. "Kick that bitch out of your house!" She turned to Nancy and said with hatred, "You killed my father, you whore!" "No," Nancy exclaimed. "Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, whore. It's all over the news, the internet, social media," Stephanie spat out. "A man killed his mistress's husband and then killed himself." They were all stunned by Steph's reaction. Her friends tried to calm her down, but to no avail. Steph approached John and Mary. "John, I don't want to see her anymore. Just tell her to go away." "Please, Steph," Nancy pleaded. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. My father died without knowing that his loving wife was a cheat and a liar. My father was killed without knowing why. He was killed without knowing that the one who pulled the trigger was his wife's lover. He died without knowing he was a cuckold. It's a tragedy and we are all in distress. Grandpa tried to calm the situation. Let's take care of what needs to be taken care of first, and then we can work on our problems later. With that bitch around, no way." "Please, Steph, don't say those words towards your mother," Grandma said. Let her do the talking, John shouted. Mary took his hand and pulled him to her. Mary, we lost our son today because of that whore. Steph's friends apologized and headed for the door. Your daughter is a cheating bitch, John continued. You know it, we know it, and the whole world found out after my only son was murdered. Normally, children have to bury their parents. Today, we parents have to bury our son. John, I want my father to be buried where you live now, in Naples. Everyone turned to Stephanie. You still know a lot of people in this town, Steph continued. You still have some connections. Get in touch with the right people to do this. And most importantly, contact a lawyer to get all the paperwork ready for my adoption. Please, Steph, don't do something you'll regret later, Grandpa begged. Please, you can't do this to me, Nancy screamed. I can't live in the same house with that cheating whore. I can't breathe the same air with her. She disgusts me. I don't want to see her face again. Steph turned to John. Ask her to leave, please. We're your grandparents, too, Grandma cried. You are part of our lives. Grandma, Grandpa, I love you with all my heart. I respect you and will never forget what you did for me. But your daughter is a bitch and I can't stand her. I'm a Westford and I belong to the Westford family. You're taking me to school on Monday, John. I'll need my papers to transfer to another school in Naples. I'll do that, of course. John pulled Steve to him and hugged her. You'll also need to sell this house. There are too many memories. Steph wiped away her tears. Nancy, take whatever you want from this house, John said imperiously. We'll donate the rest to charity. Epilogue. Stephanie moved to Naples, Florida. She never forgave Nancy. She only talked to her grandparents when they called. Once a week she visited Steve's grave. John and Mary were now her parents. Nancy started seeing a psychiatrist, but after a couple months, things got worse. She had to be admitted to a mental institution. Her doctor begged Steph to see her mother only once, and to forgive her. This would help Nancy in her recovery. Steph flatly refused. On the morning of Steph's 18th birthday, a nurse found Nancy's motionless body in her bed and a pool of blood on the floor. She had slit her wrists during the night. Stephanie refused to attend the funeral. Yes, fraud always has a price. Dave and I had been married for about 4 years when we decided it was time to expand our little family. I met Dave at a deposition at the health insurance company I worked for. He was the lead attorney for the plaintiff, and I was one of the henchmen defending the defendant. Dave was, and still is, a brilliant attorney, a fast-paced partner destined to make millions in the pursuit of justice. While I am a competent attorney, I would not claim to be in his class, and so I was surprised to hear from him shortly after the lawsuit was settled. I quickly discovered that over numerous dinners, courtships, drinks, dances, and activities, he was a witty and charming companion. Sex was everything we could both want. Dave was an inventive and attentive lover, and nature blessed me with a passionate and responsive body. Marriage followed, and we settled into one of those ubiquitous gated communities that seem to sprout like weeds all over Long Island, at least for the wealthy who have a few million to buy a 4-bedroom ranch that was too expensive in price and too big for the two of us. But we had room to grow, and we had room for an au pair in case I wanted to go back to work. Like many privileged couples, we were living the American dream with more money than a young couple could reasonably expect, and at times it seemed that the only problem we faced was the number of hours Dave worked. Although we were both lawyers, my job was more of a 9-to-5 office job, while he spent a lot of time looking for the almighty partnership. So I often had to attend the endless meetings, barbecues, dinners, wine tastings, and general neighborhood gatherings that living in a gated community entailed. It was during the many gatherings of this nature that I became friends with Joanna and, by extension, her husband Walter. The couple intrigued me, and since I had some free time, I was on vacation in the last month of my pregnancy and decided to find out what I could. No, I didn't hire a private investigator or dig into their personal life. I just befriended Joanna since she wasn't working and lived only 2 houses away from us. I was intrigued. It was a mystery. Walter, I realized, was a CPA and had his own small firm. Oddly enough, unlike some of the other businessmen in the neighborhood, he never seemed to seek new business or try to make connections. He looked like an accountant, mid-40s, balding, a little overweight, though I wouldn't call him fat. He didn't look like he ever had an athletic body, just a bookish, nerdy personality type, about 5'8" tall, and he often had a slightly aloof or confused demeanor. He never seemed to completely fit in with the guys. He didn't golf, fish, or drink, and yet he wasn't the stereotypical alpha male that our little community was teeming with. He also seemed, oddly enough for a married man, somewhat shy in the presence of women. Always polite, always a gentleman, but without flaunting it, he mostly blended in with the woodwork. Joanna, on the other hand, was beautiful, lively, vivacious, flirtatious, about 35, but looked younger and was totally devoted to Walter. She had a smile that put the Mona Lisa to shame, a body that on my best day I could never hope to compete with, breasts the size of small pineapples, probably enlarged, and a mysterious sultriness about her that just screamed for sex. I'd only seen her angry twice. Once when some men mocked Walter in her presence and she verbally chewed them out so they slipped away with their tails tucked, and the other time when one of the local Lotharios tried his tricks on her. I think he was happy to escape with his testicles intact. But she made it clear, loudly and publicly, that if he or anyone else tried it again, immediate pain would follow. What she had was meant for Walter, and no one else. She was clearly, sometimes to the point of nausea, in love with Walter. This was obvious to all of us, except, oddly enough, perhaps Walter himself, who somehow seemed a little indifferent to the whole thing. He clearly loved her, treated her wonderfully and with respect, seemed totally devoted to her, but was foolish enough to miss the clues the rest of us saw. Or maybe, having lived with it for so long, he just accepted it as natural. Like I said, they lived 2 houses down, so they had money to live here, but they didn't seem to have the toys that were so conspicuous in the rest of the neighborhood. The cars were ordinary, nothing special. There were no boats in the yard, no 90-inch TV screens, no mahogany lattice rooms that others bragged about. They had a nice yard with a pool, a regular-sized BBQ like most houses around here, but nothing ostentatious. I'd never heard her complain about being tight on money, but she certainly wasn't into the latest designer fashions. She didn't wear much jewelry, a modest but decent engagement ring, a gold wedding band, and the ubiquitous pair of gold earrings that looked exactly like 2 little cylinders. I think they had money for toys. They just didn't need to compete by showing them off. They had 2 children, a 6-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. Both were sweet little, well-behaved children, and both their mother and father obviously had a heart for them. They had a Hispanic girl who watched them, sort of a combination of maid and nanny, and Joan, who was a stay-at-home mom. But even so, they were perfectly normal. I understood that the son attended one of the best private schools in the area, but nothing special since he was only 6 years old. His mom drove him to school and picked him up afterward. His dad was at work and the nanny was babysitting. At that point, I was about 8 months into my pregnancy, and I had taken a leave of absence from work. I was used to going for a walk every morning to try and stretch out a bit, although I kept pretty close to home. So I was out early when I saw Joan leaving to take her son to school. We chatted for a bit, and I invited her over for coffee after she got home. She had a whole morning planned. Drop her son off, go to the gym, then go shopping. But she promised to stop by around lunchtime for coffee and a chat. I knew there was some story just waiting to be told, but I didn't expect to hear it today. I was wrong. Joanna came by a little later and we were sitting around drinking coffee and chatting about pregnancy and babies in general when I asked her if she was planning on having more children. It's up to Walter. Whatever he wants, I'll do. If he wants more, we'll have more. If not, we won't. I noticed that she was twirling her little gold earring with her fingers as she said this, a nervous habit I'd seen her have several times when something concerned Walter. Of course, you have to be a part of this decision too. I mean, this isn't the 19th century. It's not like he can force you to get pregnant. No, Walter would never do that. He's really nice, and I couldn't hope for a nicer man to marry. It's not like he would ever make me do anything. It's just that I would do anything at all, to make sure he's happy, and that includes having kids, not having kids, or whatever he wants. You really love him that much, don't you? We've all seen the way you act with him. Like he's God's gift to women and you've won a prize with the way you treat him. Honestly, I've never seen anything like it until I met you two. And yet he seems a little clueless at times. Like he doesn't understand what you do for him. And hopefully he never will, she said, twirling her earring again. I looked at her a little hard, as that was strange to hear. You don't want him to know how much you love him? It's not so much about that, it's just that it's a little hard to explain. Let me ask you a question, Roberta. You're a lawyer. If I told you something, could you keep it confidential like a lawyer to a client? I could if you hired me. Are you in some kind of trouble? Is Walter hurting you or threatening you? No, nothing like that. I just have a story I want to tell, and I'd like to tell it to someone just in case, but no one can know about it. What do I have to do to hire you? It's easy enough. Just give me something like $10 as an advance, and we can make an oral contract establishing attorney-client privilege. She grabbed her purse, pulled out a 20, held it out to me, and smiled. Consider yourself hired. I grew up on Long Island, but not in this part of it, she began. My father was a roofer, and half of what he earned he spent at the bar. So we never had much money. My mom worked as a hairdresser and brought something home, but we definitely belonged to the lower class, nothing like this neighborhood. Because of his drinking, cheating, and their fights, it's a wonder I graduated from high school, but I did, and managed to spend some time in secretarial school. I was working at a lousy agency, filling out paperwork and short-term assignments, when I met Walter. His secretary was going on maternity leave, and they hired me to replace her, so I was sort of second fiddle. When was this? Just about 10 years ago. I was 24 and had had enough of partying and started looking around for someone to start a family with. I'll admit I was a bit of a mercurial little bitch. My thought was to get a wealthy husband for a few years and then move on with a decent income, and Walter seemed like the perfect fit for that. He was 32 then, 8 years older than me, and even more ignorant and inexperienced than he is today. I didn't think he was rich, but he had his own business, a nice apartment in a good part of town, and he seemed perfect for the role of primary husband. I started dating him after my time at his office was up and soon moved in with him. About a year later, we were married. Walter was sweet and accommodating, and I thought I could control him as much as I needed to. He was also completely trusting and never asked for a prenup. I'm not proud of being a gold digger, but I won't regret it either. And yet here you are, 10 years later and still happily married. Yes, I am. We had a pretty normal engagement. My only condition for marrying him was that I wanted a house, a real house that we could call our own. I had lived in rented apartments all my life, so we looked around and chose the one we have now. I thought it was a little pricey, but Walter wanted a place for the kids, and even though I had no intention of having kids, I didn't want to disappoint him before we got married. The good news for me was that he didn't even blink when he saw the price, and he had no problem putting my name on the document. However, shortly before we got married, one event happened that, although I didn't give any real significance at the time, I later realized it was probably the most significant event of my life. What was it? A few weeks after we got engaged, Walter said he wanted us to have dinner with an old high school friend of his. We went to a little restaurant I had never been to in Little Italy, one of those quiet family places, but upscale. When we walked in, I had a strange feeling, like you were just entering someone's home, not a public place where no one cared about you. Walter had a quick word with the maitre d', told him who we were meeting, and everything changed. We were escorted to the best table, and 5 minutes later, the host was there with a complimentary bottle of his best wine. The service after that was amazing. We had 2 waiters the whole time, and we barely had to do more than blink before they were at the table. We had eaten most of our dinner, and Walter's friend still hadn't shown up when 2 large men walked in and seemed to look around the entire restaurant. Then one left and the other took a seat a little behind us. Then the first returned with 2 other men, one of whom was very well dressed and about the same age as Walter, and the other much older. Walter stood up, hugged them both, and introduced me to his friend Tony and Tony's grandfather, Tony Salvatore. These 2 were nothing like Walter at all. I asked him about it later, and he claimed Tony was just an old high school friend of his. In any case, they didn't stay long. The old man made a short toast, and they drank to the success of our wedding. Tony gave me an early wedding present, a beautiful pair of diamond earrings that I later estimated at $10,000, and everyone hugged before they left. None of them came to the wedding, and I didn't see Tony for another 2 years. So, as they say, life went on. From the excitement of getting married, moving, buying furniture, and setting up our house, I completely forgot about that dinner. Walter went to work every day but never seemed so ambitious. I asked him several times if he wanted to bring in new clients and expand his business, but he said he preferred what he had. Money was never an issue. I had no idea how much he actually had, but he never complained about the price of anything I wanted to buy, no matter how high it was. So, are you settled in marital bliss? Let's just say we're settled in marital bliss. Walter is a sweet, kind, gentle man, but sometimes a girl wants a little more than tenderness in the bedroom. When I dated before I was married, I had a few guys who liked to ride me hard, and it just wasn't Walter, and honestly, I missed it. Back then, I wasn't ready to give up on marriage to Walter, at least not until I had some idea of what he was worth, so I knew I had to be careful. But the need for something brighter was there. I wasn't going to do anything at home. There are too many prying eyes in our neighborhood, so I joined a gym. I really wanted to work out and keep my body in shape, but I remembered to hire a cute personal trainer. Christopher was busting my ass, pushing me to my limits at the gym, and eventually got me interested in him as a man. He was half Italian, about 6'1" tall, and his body was as hard as metal. We embarked on a wonderful romance, meeting at hotels several times a week for a day of fun and games. His stamina was incredible, and he gave me what I was missing. So, you had an affair. Did Walter ever find out about it? No, he never knew, but it did end amazingly badly in a way that you can't imagine worse. One day, Walter had to be away for 2 days and 2 nights for work, so Chris and I decided to get a hotel room for the night. We had never done this before. We usually just took an hour or two during the day, so this was going to be a new treat for both of us. I don't remember much. I think we were both drugged in some way. Just sometime in the evening, some stout men forced us into a car and drove us to a remote warehouse. I know Chris was in the business of selling steroids or something, so I assumed it had something to do with that, and I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it didn't look good. Are you saying you were kidnapped? What happened? How did you get out of it, and did Walter find out? I noticed that her voice seemed to take on an even monotone tone as she told me this story, as if she was detaching herself from everything that was going on. Between that and the details she was giving, it was a little unnerving. When the drugs wore off, I found myself tied to a chair. They used bandages to wrap around my arms and legs so they wouldn't leave any marks, plus some more wrapped around my mouth so I couldn't scream. For some reason, they were extra careful not to mark me in any way. Chris, on the other hand, was handcuffed and suspended by his wrists with a rope that was tied to a beam under the ceiling. My chair was facing him. 2 men came out and roughly ripped off his clothes, tearing his shirt around his handcuffed wrists. They spread a large piece of plastic sheeting under him and began beating him over and over with large, heavy chains. I could see blood splattering the tape and dripping from his wrists where the handcuffs crashed into him as they beat him. They just kept beating him as he screamed over and over. She was silent for a moment and shuddered before continuing in the same even tone. After a while, Chris stopped screaming. I think thankfully he passed out. His body was drenched in blood. One ear was partially torn off. His nose was flattened and blood was still dripping from it. His eyes were swollen and closed. A forklift pulled up with 2 55-gallon drums on a pallet and some kind of bolt cutter with a long handle. They pulled Chris up higher and put one of the barrels under him. Then one of the men put the bolt cutter over his tool and balls and cut them off. I remember the blood spurting as they fell into the barrel. They must have let go of the rope, and as Chris fell into the barrel, they closed the lid and hammered it shut. Then they rolled up the tape, put it and the cutter in another barrel, and drove them away. A few minutes later, the forklift returned with 2 new barrels. I remember thinking I was going to be next, and I passed out. I just sat and listened, mesmerized by her story. I had never heard a story like this before, and even in my wildest dreams I had not expected such a turn of events. She continued, "A little later I woke up, still tied to the chair. There was another chair across from me, and sitting on it was Walter's friend Tony. He had one of the men remove the blindfold from my mouth and one arm. I just sat there frozen and stared at him. He pulled a flask out from under his coat and held it out to me. I remember sucking on it and coughing a little. Whatever it was strong, but I needed it. It was cold where we were, and I wasn't really dressed, and the alcohol warmed me from the inside out. Tony started to speak in a steady voice. Joanna, we're going to have a little talk, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that for me, Joanna? If you do, we'll soon forget about this, and you can come home safe and sound. I just nodded at him. Does Walter know about this man you've been seeing? No, I don't think so. I tried to make sure he never found out. Is there any chance that this man got you pregnant? No, I'm on the pill. I'm not ready to have children yet. Does Walter know you're on birth control? No, he doesn't. Do you love your husband, Joanna? Do you think you can make him happy? Yes, I do, and yes, I know I can make him happy. I'm so sorry this happened. I just had to... He held up his hand and stopped me. I'm not sure if you know this, but your husband is one of the most magnificent people I know. If he wanted to, he could be a brilliant writer or scientist. He's a financial genius. Yet he has a small office and apparently very few clients. Those clients include my family and some of our friends and business associates. We also provide his services for a fee to several cartels that do business in our country. But despite these abilities, or maybe because of them, Walter is a bit of an oddball. We realize that and just want to see him happy. There are a lot of people who want to see him happy, and they're willing to go to extreme measures, as you could see today, to make sure that happens. We think you can help make him happy. I know I can make Walter happy. I really love him. Let's not have any secrets between us. I talk to Walter often, and he loves you completely. He sees you as the perfect wife and mother of his children, and I don't want to see him disappointed. We both know you're a gold digger, but what you don't know is that Walter has a lot more gold than you ever imagined. But if you try to get it, there are too many people who will be upset about it for you to ever enjoy the moment. After a while, my friends will make sure you get home safely. Walter won't even need to know about this little incident. Wait a month to be sure, then throw away the birth control pills and give Walter the children he wants. Can you do that for me? Yes, I can. I hope I never see you again, because if I do, you're not gonna like it. There's 1,000 ways for you to die, from a car accident to a robbery, and Walter will never know the real reason. Just know that before that, you'll spend your time here in hell. Don't ever give me a reason to talk to you again. Don't ever give me a reason to think you're doing something that could cause Walter unhappiness. We both just sat in silence, me too shocked to speak, and Joanna perhaps too excited by what she had told me. Then she finished the story. Walter never knew what happened. I never let him find out. I spend every moment of every day trying to please him as if my life depended on it, because it did. About a month after that, I got a box in the mail. Inside were the earrings you see me wearing and a card signed by Tony. I wear them every day to remember. What are these earrings? She took one off and held it out to me. There, cast in perfect miniature, was a 55-gallon gold barrel.